Welcome to a special edition of the Doctor's Lounge. There's a bunch of people traveling, just like we were last week in Chicago. I'm joined by Dr. DeGiorgio. See, I said it right, and Mr. Scott Becker can't say it. I don't know what the deal was with that.
I don't hold it against him.
I know, but I want to make a joke and write him about it. And then Dr. Dan Choi, thank you for joining us. What a crazy couple of weeks. Dan, do you want to tell us a little bit about what just happened to you? I know you're not going to name names, but I thought it was fascinating when you sent that message. All right, what do you got? Tell me.
Today, I had a pretty typical in a private practice day, crazy. I had a full day of patients. I had a patient walk into my office actually with a foot drop. I'm a spinal surgeon, and a foot drop in my world, neurologic compromise, nerve is pinched by disc herniation to the point that they can't lift the ankle up, and it's weakness. And interestingly enough, this wasn't actually a patient of mine. It was someone who was working with our practice and was there for an event that we were hosting. And it was actually a healthcare summit that we were actually inviting New York legislators to visit a private practice and hear from other private practice doctors in Nassau County, Long Island. And this was someone who's coming for that event. And I went to go get lunch with him, and he's dragging his foot. I'm like, hey, what's going on? And he told me he has a foot drop and spinal condition. And so I was like, hey, in my opinion, that is actually a surgical emergency. That's something that needs to go to the OR. He had actually seen another surgeon in another part of the state a couple of days ago, and their opinion was we could wait a couple weeks, see what happens, and then if it doesn't get better, then you can have an operation. And I think it's a little confusing to me. I think that's maybe there is a school of thought that you can wait on this, give steroids, but for me, if there's any kind of nerve damage, you're gambling if you don't operate on it immediately and just take care of it. Like 2 weeks later, if you're weak and you're like, okay, let's operate, then you lost 2 weeks of neural compression time that you could have not damaged the nerve, and you're going to operate anyway. So my whole take here is you should operate. So it was interesting. I shared the message with you guys that I may be called away to do this case, but we're actually going to go ahead and do that case tomorrow because it's getting a little too late. So we're going to do it tomorrow morning, first thing.
It's only 9:30 for those of us on the East Coast.
Yeah, only 9:30.
Yeah, that's a little late for an elective case.
You got to be.
Oh, that elective case, because I know you're doing cases at 3 a.m.
Yeah, sometimes when it calls for it. I think in this situation, the benefits of just doing it in the morning outweigh a little bit of a delay because we'll be fully staffed in the morning.
Another 12 hours. I agree with you, Dan. If someone comes into the ER with a foot drop, I'm taking them as soon as possible when we can do it safely. If it's been a week, waiting another 12 hours probably is not going to make a huge difference, but that is not somebody I would send away. And it's when you say that, it's funny because spine surgeons, we have this reputation for being a bit trigger happy when it comes to surgical interventions. I saw a lady in my office who was the mom of a friend of mine, and she had presented with just some neck pain and got an MRI, which showed very mild degenerative changes, very mild. And she saw 3 separate neurosurgeons who tried to direct admit her to the ER for an emergency ACDF, which was completely indicated. She had no neural compression, mild degenerative axial pain, something that could be treated conservatively. And people were trying to admit her for an emergency ACDF, which I found just astounding. And so it's interesting when you say that somebody saw somebody with a foot drop and did not recommend urgent surgery. That's not, I guess, goes contrary to some of the reputation of spine surgeons, at least that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think that there's standards of care that are established. I think foot drop, it wasn't like a complete foot drop, like where the patient was limping and his leg looked like it was giving out on him. He said it had given out on him a few times, but you know how it is. There's just different interpretations clinically. A lot of it is also personal experience, right? I've been burned, not personally. I just have had patients show up in my office with a foot drop for 3 weeks that went undiagnosed. I never saw the patient. They showed up in my office and they're like, oh, they didn't think it was a big deal and that it could be fixed. And they had let it be present there for 3 weeks. And then I took them to the OR, obviously, as soon as possible. And foot didn't get better. The foot drop didn't get better. In my world, I want to give my patients the best chance of neurologic recovery. So, to the OR we go if I see a foot
So
drop.
can this be a natural segue if we're talking about spine surgery, emergency versus elective? HHS with some prior auth changes. How often are we held up from prior auth? I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at what those changes are.
I love that you're bringing this up. That was literally my first question. What did you think about the prior auth news? All right. No, this is good. Dr. Choi, you go first.
Look, I didn't get a chance to dig too deep into it, but I read some social media posts about it. It sounded like I looked at a post by Real Doc Speaks, who is on X, and he was doing a deep dive into that event, the press conference that they were holding with RFK Jr. No, it wasn't RFK. It was, I think, Dr. Oz and RFK Jr. And what it sounded like to me was more of a kumbaya moment. There was no rules actually being written, that Dr. Oz was being extremely friendly to all the health insurance executives of the BUCAs, so the Blue Cross, United, they're all there, Aetna, and they're pledging, we're going to be good citizens, and we are going to look at prior auth, and we're going to make sure patients don't get hurt. And funny enough, Real Doc Speaks, I think, said something that Dr. Oz was actually blaming doctors for prior auth, that we need to make sure that doctors are not overutilizing. And it's very insurance speak, what the insurance companies use to justify prior auth, which is that doctors are the problem. And all of this just, to me, sounds like the same shenanigans that has been plaguing healthcare reform for decades, right, in this country, which is, right, money talks, and they're just following the lead of what the insurance lobby wants, which is just don't bother us, leave us alone. And yes, they need to present a front to the American people that they're going to go after the insurance companies. But until they have some real teeth in these regulations and the health insurances companies really feel the pain of not following through with their promises with prior auth, none of this matters. It's just talk.
Look, I think the interesting thing is sometimes, and this is why we have so many different opinions on this podcast of ours, sometimes it doesn't matter. As you guys know, I ran a health plan that had no copays, no deductibles, no co-insurances. You know what else it had? Free authorizations weren't allowed. And so look, we covered some 3 million people. 3 million, not a huge number, but certainly not small, right? And so I never had them. We didn't allow them. And when we looked at data from before people got on the plan to after they got on the plan, we didn't see an increase. And if we saw one, let's say that was a 2 standard deviation move, right, over a 6-month period, we'd have a conversation with that practice. We'd say, hey, what's going on? Did you see a bunch of, right? Because anytime you look at, we always looked at ratios, I'm sure you guys do, like how many new patients did we talk to? How many appointments did we set? How many of those patients ultimately ended up getting a procedure, right? So I think you want to be careful with those numbers, right? Sometimes people, the doctors in our meetings would go, oh, you're 2 for 1. You can't have those kind of numbers. And then another guy would be 11 for 1. And you go, you can't have those kind of numbers. And I think when it comes to pre-auth, here's what I'd like to say. It's not black and white. And this is one of the things that I really want physicians across the country to understand, is that employers hold these strings. There are 110 million Americans covered by employer plans, of which about 2/3 are self-insured, meaning they're cash pay patients. They're cash pay companies. They give money to an insurance company so that the insurance company can pay their bills on their behalf, right? And so none of those employers have to have pre-authorizations. So when patients call in or they tweet at me or whatever we call it now that X owns it, or when they send messages, Dutch, oh my God, because I know you guys get these DMs. They're the craziest things. Somebody thinks you're going to help them. And I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I'm an accountant. Like, I'm the worst person ever to send these messages to. What I do say to them is, did you call the HR department? Because let me tell you, the one thing I learned in 17 years of running these health plans, no HR person is going to take any crap from a consultant or a broker. Now, we talk a lot about how they're protective, but in this case, the HR person will definitely call and say, why the heck is somebody having this problem? And this is how we solve it. So I'd love to see more doctors push back on these pre-authorizations. I agree with what Dr. Choi said. And certainly I love Real Doc Speaks, right? Like he's a tremendous asset on social media. But I think we're looking at it in a binary way versus maybe a horizontal path, right? Instead of looking vertically. Because pre-authorizations don't matter if employers decide they don't. If enough patients speak up, it won't matter at all anymore.
So do you think that the best method then, let's just say I'm getting my MRI denied, right, by pre-auth. Would you advise me to call my HR department if it's a self-funded plan?
Like today, right now, call them up. And here's what I've seen. And I'm being as genuine as I can be. I don't know what the exact number is, but I know it's more than 10,000 of these types of inquiries to our company over all these years. And I can't tell you 15 or 20 of them where the HR department was like, yeah, there's nothing we can do. And that was like at the largest companies in the country. Everywhere else, like they got on the phone and they're like, oh, we're done with this. We're self-funded. You get this done now. And self-funded plans have the right to do that. They're not governed by any of these same rules. When it's a fully insured plan, it's the insurance company taking the risk. So yeah, you're going to get screwed. Fully insured plans are bad. I don't know why anybody wants to be on one. I get all these people tell me they want to be on one.
I think for the audience though, can you just define the difference? Because I know the difference between a self-funded and fully funded, but I think like to a fifth grader, like how do you explain self-funded versus fully funded? Because they're two different classes.
Totally different things. Yeah.
Totally different. And I don't think people understand that. Even doctors don't understand there's a difference.
Oh, doctors definitely don't, but I love them so much.
Patients don't either.
No.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. That's why we got a podcast. Yeah. No, look, essentially, fundamentally, fully insured plan is when you call an insurance company or you go online and you buy a plan and they say, hey, for $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month here on the East Coast, we'll cover your family of four and we'll give you a $7,800 out-of-pocket max. In other words, you got to come up with $7,800 before we ever treat you, and then you pay us $3,000 a month. That's because they're taking the risk. If anything goes wrong, and let's say the worst thing in the world happens, right? Something totally acute and something terrible. Or
you end up in my OR.
That's right. We end up in his OR, then they've lost money, right? Because they're not getting $200,000 or $300,000 from you. They're getting a few bucks. On the self-funded side, that's what happens when companies are big enough to take on risk. And when they do that, they're no longer adherent to an insurance company telling them what they can and can't do because they're doing all the risk taking. Now, the nice thing is self-funded plans have this layer called stop loss, and stop loss just covers it after a certain amount of money has been spent. And so you're never really out of pocket too much cash. But that's the general idea. You'll hear people talking about insurance, and when they say the word insurance, they mean a fully insured plan.
Do you know what percentage of plans in this country are self-funded? Because from what I understand, it's increasingly more and more, right?
It's humongous. Yeah, I said earlier, 110 million Americans, about 66% are on a self-funded plan, and the other 33% are on a fully insured plan.
Yeah,
I'll find the tweet. I've posted about this. I probably do it once a month where I go through all the numbers. So there's Medicare numbers, Medicaid numbers. And as Dr. DeGiorgio says, sometimes they're both. And because they're one and the same, right? People are dual. And then you've got fully insured small plans, fully insured group plans, and then you've got self-funded plans. And then you've got self-funded naked plans. So yeah, we'll put some stuff in the show notes and kind of give people some direction on that.
I think this is that point is fantastic, Dutch, because I don't want to see prior auth go away by way of legislation, because I think that anytime you introduce more rules, you're going to get unintended consequences. I want prior auth to go away because of competition, because plans like your plan and self-funded plans will realize they don't like it, that the doctors don't like it, the beneficiaries don't like it, and they're going to gravitate towards plans that don't utilize prior authorization as a control mechanism as much. The problem comes when you get into the Medicare Advantage space, because you don't have as competitive an environment, and you don't have that self-funded aspect. You can't call up your HR department at Medicare. Nope. And I understand the need for it, but if you had a more competitive MA marketplace and a more competitive Medicaid MCO marketplace. And this is something we've discussed, is that the barriers for entry are just far too high in both of those spaces. But if you had a more competitive marketplace there, I think prior auth would go away on its own, because the doctors wouldn't want to contract with plans that had onerous prior auth, hospitals wouldn't want to, and patients wouldn't like it. I think patients are well aware of how bad it is.
I do agree with you. I think we need more MA plans that are not based on these cumbersome rules. The challenge is that all the risk, right, that you're taking on, and you're getting capitated payments, and there's a bunch of challenges. But the nice thing is, and I think employers are waking up. Of course, I've said that since 2005, so I don't know, I might be incrementally correct. The challenge is that most employers, even self-funded ones, don't understand that they have the power to do whatever it is they want to do.
Right.
They think, oh, I have to do what Blue Cross tells me or what Cigna tells. No, you don't have to do what they tell you. You have to do what you want to do, right? Like, you get to do whatever you want. And if you don't want to have pre-auths, you just won't have them. What I would do, and which every self-funded plan does, every self-funded plan has access to data, right? And everybody has business intelligence software. Like, why can't you just download your utilization, which they already have access to these reports? They know exactly how many procedures they do. They know exactly what the paid claims are. Why not do an analysis, say, hey, I'm a big employer, I'm Morgan Stanley, I'm just picking on one, or I'm Ernst & Young, or I'm Dollar General. Like, I'm going to get rid of all pre-auths. And then if I decide that they've gone above a certain threshold, then I'm going to figure it out and rein it in. But why would you even have them? Let doctors do their damn job and let's move on with life. I mean, it just doesn't seem that hard for me.
It was interesting in Becker's. One of the panels was talking, a large, I believe it was a hospital organization, spoke about how they negotiated out prior auth from one of their payers. Right. And they were able to do that because they said, look, our physicians have 98+% authorization. Why don't you just give us a break? And part of the negotiation was getting rid of the prior auth. But what was interesting is when the insurance company came back and said, sure, but your advanced practice providers have an 80% authorization rate. So you have to rein in all their imaging, ordering, all of that in order for us to cut this deal. But I think that shows there is some room for negotiation on the hospital side. And I think if we want another reason to be upset at the large hospital corporations, I think that they could negotiate better prior auth for us. I don't think they do, because I think that they want every last dollar that they can squeeze out of the payers. And they realize that the prior auth burden is going to be shifted to the physicians anyway. So they'd rather keep all the money they're getting for each DRG and realize that we're going to deal with the prior auth burden regardless, rather than negotiate that away.
Just think about how many more RVUs we could all collect if we weren't dealing with pre-auths.
It's true. I think clinical throughput would just be higher, right? I think the problem there, Anthony, is not necessarily that they're trying to collect every dollar and not trade that away. I think the hospitals are too big and inefficient to even take on this issue of prior auth and then think about the clinical throughput that will happen. Yes, I do think that they're going, okay, the doctors are dealing with it, but they're not. It's probably like first and second order thinking. They're not thinking about the third order or fourth order implications, which is, look, if you fought prior auth and let the doctors just sit there and treat patients, your clinical productivity would increase, your throughput would increase, therefore you would generate more revenue. I actually don't think they're thinking that. I could be wrong.
You're right. No, I think you're right. I was probably giving them too much credit.
Dixit, I'm super happy you're here. Welcome to your podcast, The Doctor's Lounge.
Is that your guitar back there?
Those are my guitars, man. Oh, nice. You're going to have to jam for us one of these days. Come on.
Yeah, when I get a little bit of time. I'm bummed I missed the Becker's thing. It looked like a lot of fun. It looked like a lot seeing you guys together. I assume prior auths were a topic of conversation at the Becker's meeting.
Yes.
I'm really curious what your guys' feedback was on what Greg Murphy is proposing, and just how some of our professional societies, especially AANS, CNS, are jumping on that. I posted about that on LinkedIn today.
What did he say? Catch me up.
So essentially, it's HR 2433. It's basically called the Reducing Medically Unnecessary Delays in Care Act to reform prior authorizations in Medicare Advantage and Part D prescription drug plans. So it's essentially saying they need to rein this in to enable physicians to do their job. But there was another angle to this that I want you guys to comment on, and that is the insurance companies are starting to use AI algorithms to basically process the denials. And so you've set up this arms race where you have companies, vendors trying to sell practices, similar AI tools to try to counteract the AI that Cigna or United Healthcare is going to be using. And that's one of the cardinal elements of this little proposal. It's still got to go up for a vote. It's just basically saying we need to stop tying the physician's hands.
Our practice uses ChatGPT right now to, it's a part of the arms race. You have to have it. So we actually started we signed a BAA with OpenAI. We can drop in patient data, but they can't train on it and they delete the data afterwards. But we can generate patient-specific letters of medical necessities to respond to denials pretty quickly. It used to take 45 minutes to an hour to figure out how to write a patient-specific letter of medical necessity. And
I
obviously
love it.
you get buried in that. But now we can drag and drop into a trained algorithm in ChatGPT and generate that same letter in 30 seconds and then send it over. So we've been utilizing this and it's been a huge help, but it's like, why do we have to even do that? So that's the question. And honestly, I would think that we're probably one of the only private practices that I know of that have implemented this. I probably think there's 2 or 3 other ones that are probably figured this out. And if you're a private practice doctor listening to this, you should look into using ChatGPT with your staff ASAP. It's a game changer.
Now, Dr. Choi, do you have an MCP server?
No, what is that?
Okay. No, that literally, that's how you just keep the data on your side of the fence.
Okay.
But if it sounds like they made a special deal with you, right? Which is really cool.
It is. They have a
Like
division. They have a health division that actually handles this.
I had no idea. Oh, we're going to have to talk about that too. No, we did a local server and then that's how we make sure no information goes away. I didn't know you could do this special deal. I'm going to have to call him and find out what the offering is.
It
Yeah,
wasn't
because we
easy
have the
to
same
get
problem.
through. It wasn't easy to get through though. It took weeks to set this up with them. But
really?
It is. We vetted it. It's a BAA. It's HIPAA compliant. So there's an.
That's
avenue.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
We have our own server at UCSF for AI, LLM. Yeah.
I love that. Dr. Dixon, we did miss you. We had a really good time. I had a good time.
It
I don't know
looked
about the
great.
rest of everybody else, but I had a great
That was
time.
a blast.
Yeah.
No, it looked like a good meeting. I'll catch up with you next time. No, I think staying on this topic just for a second, I think the AI thing is very interesting because we're still very much in the hype cycle, but it has been implemented and it has been monetized. There are at least 12 companies that have commercialized the product to deal with prior authorizations. And there are 5 specifically dealing with this, and there are several others that are using chatbots, AI agents. The big health systems are already leveraging some of this technology. One of my cohorts here in Nashville is part of a company that is actually, I think the product is being used at Vanderbilt. And one of his comments about the product that they got from Vanderbilt was, okay, you're helping us manage our prior authorizations, but the process is not a static process. The insurance companies change the rules and bend the rules. And so the agent has to be able to adapt to compensate for those changes. The criticism they were getting was, okay, you guys are adapting, but you guys are not telling us how to optimize in the long run. And if you think about that, if they tell them how to optimize in the long run, they essentially lose business. It's astounding how much money we are spending trying to manage how the money flows in healthcare. And that money is being taken away from things that are really important, like taking care of patients.
Yeah.
Dutch, I don't know if you know what the costs are off the top of your head. What does prior authorization cost a physician practice or cost a system? All right. Do you have any estimates?
I suspect it's a lot of money.
I think that's a very interesting question. Yeah.
Like I visited with a practice in Northern Arizona, big surgical ortho practice, and she had 12 people, right? And she's like, I have 12 people because we deal with this issue. I'm like, 12 people? That's a lot. That's a big number. The thing about prior auths that doesn't make sense to me is why do you need them? Like, why wouldn't you do it retrospectively? If the patient didn't need it at the end of the day, why don't we figure it out with using some data? Like, I just don't understand why we do it in the first place. I get that it's a money thing, but I actually don't think that's really what it is. And let me just point this out on the employer side. The employer side, it's even worse because we don't really see, even when pre-auths are enforced, you don't see a lot of pushback on pre-auths because the incentive for the carrier in an administrative services contract, which is what a self-funded contract is called, an ASO, administrative services only agreement, right? What happens then is they don't care at all because they're paid and compensated for utilization on their network. And then they're compensated for paying your bills like an accountant. Like they don't care. But where they take risk, that's when you start seeing these pre-auth problems, right?
With
So
MA.
we've got to figure out how to get them out of the taking risk, or we've got to decrease the amount of risk they can take. Do you know what I mean? We have to do something because Dr. DiGiorgio is right. The reason no one likes Medicare Advantage, the reason physicians don't like them, is because anytime you ask for something, they tell you no.
Yeah. Can we talk more about Medicare?
We talk about whatever you want.
I want to link it to actually the New York City mayor race that just happened,
Jesus.
right?
I've got some comments on that too, but go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm going to mute myself now.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about we don't have to talk specifically about the election, but it's quite interesting. We have all of a sudden a movement hard left in New York City. I guess I'm not super surprised. There's always reactive movements to what's going on in the broader culture. But when I was looking at this recent election of a socialist to New York City mayor, I was looking at some of the commentary on why this is happening. But there's commentary of, you have these millennials and Gen Z who went to these elite colleges and they got brainwashed and now they don't know how business works and how economies work and they have no idea. And now they're going to run New York City into the ground and they elected someone without being rooted in reality. I'm not sure if I buy that 100%, but there's another interesting perspective that I saw that it was an email, I guess, sent from Peter Thiel to Zuckerberg. And it was talking about how the boomer generation has held on to power and influence for far longer than their predecessors have. And back 50 years ago, when they looked around at the CEOs of their companies, most of their CEOs were, in the 50s. And now you're looking at CEOs that are in their late 60s or early 70s. They also made a comparison, to the presidential ages and how in the last 3 presidents that we've had, everyone has been 65 plus, right, in that boomer generation. And so that generation, which is a sizable population in the United States, I don't know the exact percentage, but I'm sure it's a big sizable population. They have a lot of wealth, they have a lot of influence, and they are largely responsible, I think, in my opinion, for the societal structure that we've fallen into as a millennial. I'm a millennial. Look, it's not all their fault. It also was built on the generations before them, the problems anyway. But I think some of the biggest problems that we can identify in healthcare, I'm going to identify 2 problems that I think have been originated and perpetuated by the boomers, and now they've got to live with it. Okay, because you know what? The boomers are the ones who are going to require the most healthcare in the next 20 years. Okay, they are the ones who are dependent on our generation of healthcare providers, whether it be physicians, nurses, any kind of clinician. And our generation is now taking care of the older generations, right? We got to take care of our elderly, aging parents. As physicians, we're also taking care of the aging population. And if you look at what's been set up by the boomers, they are all 62 and up, and they are all qualified for Medicare at this point, right? So I'm sure there's some school of thought that they've paid into the system. I paid my Medicare taxes my whole life, and now I'm entitled to these health benefits. But they've got to ask themselves, what kind of healthcare system have I paid into? Now that I finally arrived at this land of Medicare, what does this entitle me to? And what healthcare system has been built that they've left behind that is going to be taking care of them? So what have you got in the last 10 years, 14 years since the ACA has been passed that basically the boomer generation saw unfolding? They were the leadership in most of these healthcare companies that built the system we have during post-ACA, which is highly consolidated. Large health systems, independent practices being bought up by private equity, by United Healthcare, by hospital systems. And you have also the boomer generation of physicians who, when they graduated medical school in the 1970s to 1990s, when they left medical school and they left training, guess what happened? They all entered private practice. About 95% of them probably went into some type of private practice. And maybe they weren't business savvy, but they had business savvy physicians in the practices that joined that actually mentored them and taught them, hey, this is private practice. This is how you stay independent. This is how you run a business. This is how you run payroll. This is how you keep overhead low. This is how you do billing. And they passed on, I believe, this business knowledge to younger associates who eventually they would sell the practice to. And you had a profession. All these boomer physicians entered into these private practices and they maintained autonomy. They were not a big cohort of employed physicians. But as those physicians aged, and as my generation entered into the workforce, what these physicians chose to do, in my opinion, many of them, is that, look, yes, the conditions were tough. The market forces of consolidation were cutting revenue, and maybe were getting squeezed, and they were taking shelter, and they said, you know what, we have to sell to private equity, and we have to sell to the health systems. But honestly, I just feel this a little bit sense of, I think, betrayal, or just why didn't that older generation of physicians fight harder and try harder to maintain their private practices and think about the future generations of our profession to maintain our autonomy, and how critical it was for them to pass on their practices to younger physicians. So, you have the physicians who basically gave up their independence. And then on the flip side, you now have this huge population of baby boomers who are now on Medicare, and they're looking at the system where they're having a hard time finding physicians, finding specialists to take them. They're getting run over by prior auth, and they're looking at this Medicare system, which is literally what it is. It's a single payer system. Okay, so you have a big bulk of the population who is now on a fee schedule. That Medicare is a government set rate. It is not a market rate. It is the bottom, bare bones for the socially vulnerable rate that the government decided at some point. And now we have this huge population that's on Medicare, and they all need care. And when you have an economic system that's driven by single payer and price setting, you're not going to get high outputs. You're not going to get competition. You're not going to get all these physicians. When the Medicare's fee schedule is cutting every year and not keeping up with inflation, you're not going to see a bunch of physician practices clamoring and saying, let me take in Medicare patients, and the economic incentives are no longer there, and you have consolidation instead, and you have a very narrow throughput, something it's not encouraging competition. You're not encouraging health system to take on more Medicare patients. So who is going to take care of all our Medicare patients? I think this is a big crisis. It's a big storm. No one's talking about it. It's a big wave that's going to hit, and you're going to have a lot of older patients who are going to have access problems, and it's not being talked about. My proposal for this, my solution is to raise the Medicare eligibility age. It shouldn't be 62. Patients are living longer. They're healthier longer. It should be like 72. And you know what? That's going to be very unpopular. I don't think it's politically palatable, but I see that as one of the ways to fix this problem. But anyway, rant over.
So I'll tell you how he's going to solve the problem when he becomes governor of New York. He's going to tie taking care of Medicaid patients and Medicare patients to your medical licensure. Expect that to happen in some way, shape, or form. My 1-minute rant was going to be about him and healthcare, because he's been in the news. I've been very fascinated about his perspectives about a lot of things, but I'll touch upon that later. Dan, you bring up a very salient point, and in light of we don't want to get into the specifics, the little message you got earlier this week that you shared with us, it was really fascinating how there's not a sense of entitlement, but maybe it is a sense of entitlement. Just like, we've got a patient, but we want you to see the patients. And that's great. I'm very happy to get the patient in. I'm not going to be able to get the patient in until such time. I've got somebody else who's great. We'll get them in. We're very happy to accommodate. And somehow that's not good enough. I don't think the patients care about competition. I don't even think the physicians care about competition at this point in time. I think the patients just want access, and that's what everything's predicated on. I don't know how you begin to address that problem. We all have so many disparate views on how this stuff needs to be managed. While we have the disparate views, we have the similar concern of this is not sustainable.
I think it's pretty obvious not sustainable. The Medicare Trust Fund is very clearly got a cliff that it's reaching. But go ahead, Dutch.
No, I was going to ask. I had a similar situation to Dr. Choi this week, but in this case, it was my own family member, right, who's unhealthy, right, has some challenges, needed to see a doc. I called one of our friends and I said, hey, my parents are in your city. I need some help. Who? Because I know how this works. I said, who do you know that you love that takes Medicare patients? Right? And I think, by the way, I think that's the right way to frame it, because there's a bunch of docs that do not take Medicare. And it's not because they don't care. It's because they care about themselves and they care about their families. And the Medicare rates are too low. And you do anything with Medicare if the rates are too low. And so that story that Dr. Choice shared hit home pretty hard for me. I hate seeing loved ones not get the care they need, but you've got to pick from who you can pick from. And then you have to ask yourself, just as he mentioned in his rant, this is what you voted for. And then what are how are we responsible for what they voted for?
If you're talking about how do you fix Medicare, right? So make it so that Medicare is the only option, that you can essentially outlaw private insurance, a la Canada. And then that would be one way to fix the access issue, because now everyone has to take this really terrible rate. I don't think that the boomers would necessarily go for that, because then they're just sharing Medicare with everyone. So this big trust fund is now going to be diluted even further. Not that the trust fund is sustainable, as we mentioned before, but that is one way to do it. And then, as Sanat said, tying acceptance of Medicare to licensure is another quite authoritarian way to do it. I don't know that. I guess each state could do it on their own, but I think that would be a tough sell for some states.
Yeah, I think that increasingly now, every week, I am receiving inquiries as a physician 2 to 3 times a week now. Just like Dutch, you had said your family friend needed help. I'm getting friends of friends, colleagues, friends known years ago reaching out saying, hey, my mom is in New York City, can't get in with an orthopedic surgeon or can't get in with an oncologist or whatnot. And can you help? It's going to take months for them to get their appointment. And Scott Becker has talked about this in many of his posts, where the impending physician shortage is looming. And he talked about how increasingly he also sees this too, that nobody can get in with his specialist unless you know someone in the medical field. This is highly concerning. And what I think is that if you really look at the boomer generation, all covered by Medicare, they're going to get to a point where they can't take it anymore. They're going to be like, we are not getting the care that we want. We're going to hear a rise. I think, like I said, it's a big storm coming. And the question is, how are they going to deal with it? Are they going to mistakenly think that forcing healthcare doctors to take Medicare, abolish private practice, nationalize healthcare, go to the national health system, is that the way that they're going to answer this question? Or are they going to wake up and be like, we need to do what America's best at, which is, Dutch, you wrote a post on this week, which was amazing. It was like, why don't we export American healthcare excellence? We have excellent healthcare in this country, which I think was built on a foundation of private practice and entrepreneurship and private practice that just drove productivity in this country, as well as academic medicine, and hospitals also had a big part in this too. But there was a lot of free market forces that drove American medicine to where the heights that it is now today. And I hope when the boomers wake up and they realize that they have a supply problem for physicians, that the way they fix this is by embracing free market principles that built this healthcare system the way it is today. I hope that's the way they turn it, not the opposite way.
Yeah, I know more and more people on Medicare who are just getting their primary care through DPC. And so I think more and more Medicare beneficiaries are going to say, why did I pay all this money into Medicare to pay out of pocket when I finally reach Medicare age? And I keep coming back to it. If you do like a simple back of the envelope calculation, if you took the average Medicare contribution for the average working American through their lifetime and instead put it in an HSA that was indexed to the S&P 500, they would have about $2 million total by the time they reach retirement age. So you're telling me that the average, with some sort of stop-loss catastrophic plan after that, the average senior couldn't manage their benefits, manage their health care with that $2 million better than Medicare could? I think that they could. And I think being able to take that cash and get a DPC, get a cash pay surgery center, that's the way to fix it. Is that politically palatable? Probably not.
You're 100% right. And yet what Dr. Choi says, which is none of these people are taking responsibility for their choices. When you look at the economists that wrote those papers in 1968 all the way to 1975, the names are still around. And by the way, they did go to the most prestigious schools, right? That our society thinks are important. And as I've been around DC, all I see is people jogging with their "I went to this great school" shirt on. And so these are the same people that have made these mistakes for 35 or 40 years. Yet they refuse to acknowledge what Dr. Choi just said and what you just said so eloquently, which is we made massive errors. And now we're going to try to fix it by not fixing it at all.
Right.
It's a humongous problem.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's an entitlement that you can't touch.
No. And it's a disaster. I would much rather give free citizens $2 million.
Yeah.
It just makes, and this is why I'm here in DC. I'm always frustrated when I get here. When I get home tomorrow, I'm gonna have to take like a long shower and be around my kids for a day and a half without looking at my phone. These idiots here, they got rid of the DPC on your HSA. They got rid of the FIT plan. No, that's not exactly what it's called, the FIT Act, where all the preventative maintenance you do for yourself, including DPC, including gym memberships, including like these wholesome things that you can do, gone.
Yep.
We're not going to let you deduct that off your tax. We're sick. We're a sick society.
What would motivate people more than watching their HSA grow year over year into a multi-million-dollar account that you can use? That would motivate people to stay healthy, right? It's going to motivate more than guaranteed minimum coverages under the ACA, that's for sure.
If only the American voter had a lobby or a way to let the politicians know what they actually wanted. You know, we vote these people in, and it doesn't matter that we vote them in, another group of people. And I appreciate the advocacy Dutch is doing. You guys have gone up on the hill. Just like lobbyists ultimately bend their ear, and it's a problem. So just piggybacking on what Dan said, that Becker post by Scott Becker was great. We need more doctors. It's plain as day we need more doctors. One of the criticisms levied against the AMA is the AMA is throttling the supply of physicians. And we know that's not true. That's not how it works. But I thought about this. It'd be very interesting to see how do they open the spigot up so that you can go from 1 million providers to, I don't know, 2 million physicians in this country. That would be quite a jump. What do you think is going to happen to the income potential of those physicians? The pie's not going to grow exponentially. That's going to decrease. I piggybacked on what said. All that stuff is.
Can I just ask your assumption on that? Because
I got to run, guys. I'm so sorry.
No worries. See you later.
Bye, Dan.
I actually think you have a really great point, but I think the assumption that it's not going to grow may not be entirely 100% great. And the only reason I say that is because when I walk into private practices, which I do 3 times a week, I say to them, the best time is coming because there's not enough. I don't know how many you'd have to add. We'd have to figure out the math. But I don't think even if you added whatever number you came up with in your head, we'd have enough.
Yeah, I think the solution is to have a market. The solution is if we have people that do something novel and innovative, but that's not what they're talking about over here. Scott Becker was talking about we're probably going to have to hire more APPs. And again, all that stuff is fine to be able to get access. That I piggybacked on this and said, listen, our policymakers are shooting themselves in the foot and shooting the rest of us in the foot, to your point, which is you can't have this system where you have cradle-to-grave healthcare for everybody coming into the country and a border that's not closed where everybody can come in and you can have one or the other. It's not going to work. It's just, you're going to run out of money. You're going to run out of time.
And to Troy's point, Medicare is price setting. And if this is no different than the gasoline lines we had in the 70s, right? If you set the price too low, you're going to get shortages. And that's exactly what we're seeing. I think, and the other part of the problem is that the administrative burden, the joy that it comes with being a physician is gone away because of this high administrative burden. And we're seeing a lot of older physicians retire early. How many physicians do you know, Dutch, that are just looking for the first exit, right?
Everybody's out.
Off ramp. Exactly. And those are the most cost-effective physicians, right? The ones with experience. And you're driving them out of practice and hoping to replace them with new grads, with APPs who, frankly, cost more to practice medicine because they order more tests and they're not as experienced, and et cetera, et cetera. So part of the problem is just making it so that we regain the joy in the practice of medicine, which I think is all about empowering physicians, returning private practice to a viable practice model, et cetera, so that we can keep those physicians practicing longer instead of looking for the
How do we
out.
keep the two of you practicing longer? What can we do to say, hey, we're really appreciative? Because it's not money. It might be some compensation thing, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's money. So what is it really?
The opportunity to build an ecosystem you have an ownership stake in.
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly.
That's my core principle. And it took a while to get to this mindset, because when you go to medical school, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a surgeon, you want to help people. And it's poo-poo to have that attitude. I understand that to some degree. That I don't know what the culture is in medical school now. I imagine it's not too dissimilar to what the culture was when I was there, which was you can't talk about making money. You can't talk about marketing. The service, the profession is about being an intellectual and providing a service. That's noble. But there's another part of this that when you willfully ignore that element of ownership, not ownership in terms of a tangible asset, but of a process and a policy, you find yourself in this role. That's the only thing that keeps me going. I like building. I've figured out I wanted to build something. I think going to business will make me a better doctor because it changed the way I thought about a number of things, especially about the value I provide and the value I create. And my most frustrating metric is trying to discern and define that value inside of a system like Medicare, where somebody else is telling you what you're worth. That was my whole thing. The people should be telling us what we're worth is the patients.
The
They're not
patients.
the ones telling us. Damn.
No, that's right.
Yep.
100%.
Yeah. My mentor through training, Frank Colicchia, he was the chairman down at LSU where I trained. His practice was started by his dad, Carl Colicchia Neurological Clinic. Gorgeous practice in New Orleans.
Frank is great.
Frank is
Great
fantastic. I named my son after Frank. That's how much I loved him as a chairman. And his practice was, his dad built it. He inherited it. He was well known throughout New Orleans, a respected figure in the city and the community. And he recently had to sell it to the hospital because it's just not sustainable anymore. But for physicians to be able to do that, to build something, to be part of the community as a name for themselves, for their practice, and not just be building themselves up as employee of X health system. I think that's what keeps people engaged and working. And that autonomy that comes with that, being able to set your schedule, set your clinic, not told that you have to meet certain RVU totals, et cetera, not being told that you need to see these patients and meet these quality metrics and all that. That's what you really want as a doctor, to have that ownership, have something you've built.
I wrote something yesterday, which apparently got pretty popular. I only know because I looked today. I've been too busy. Usually I'm like,
you read a
every
lot
10
of things.
seconds.
Hang on. You read a lot of things that get really popular. You got to be specific.
Okay, but this one was about, by the way, I've said this to you guys. The challenge is physicians accept the crumbs. And that's something like, so I'm going to be 50 this year. And I told myself when I'm 60, if one of the few things I do besides help patients get access to care is to teach physicians like that they are the piece that's missing. Like I see young doctors and I tell them, I go, you have all the power. And they go, no, I don't. This guy tells me what to do and I have to do this many RVUs and there's just no chance. I don't even think I want to do this anymore. Oh my God, I've been practicing 5 years. I had this conversation with a kid at the University of Colorado last week. And I just thought, holy crap, here's like a trained surgeon. The guy is learning how to do magic with his hands and fix people that need help. And he feels like he's the lowest person on earth. And he's like, I got a debt. And now I got my second kid. Oh my God, I don't have any money. And I'm thinking like, You're sitting on a gold mine, pal. Warren Buffett said something that changed my life in the mid 90s. And he gave the most wonderful investment advice. He said, buy things that have intrinsic value that are undervalued by the market. And buy them. And then just wait. And when I see young physicians, and by young physicians, I probably mean 35, right? Or 38, something like that. They're the most valuable individuals on the planet. Besides the docs who are in their late 50s, early 60s, who are now going to leave, but we really don't want them as a society to leave. This whole problem that we're talking about today is something that we have to fix, but I think it starts with encouragement from the two of you and the rest of our lovely panel, which is like, it's an empowerment feeling where you go, look, if I don't do this, one, these patients are not going to get well. In DiGiorgio's case, they're not even going to live tomorrow if I don't do this surgery today, right now. You guys have that. I'm an accountant. I don't have any of that. I just think, wow, grab your balls, man. Get going. Stop letting the government putz you around. And by the way, Keith Smith and I don't get along, but I love him to death and I respect him immensely. Oh, he's a pain in the ass. And he said the same thing about me. Don't worry. It's two-way street. But he said the same thing. He's like, all of you just kowtow, or whatever it's called, to the insurers, just like Oz did yesterday. It was embarrassing. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you, United. What are you? It's so putsy. Have some courage, man. And the guy's intellectually brilliant. I don't get it, man. I don't get it. I want you guys to have all the ownership and autonomy you want. That's why I'm in this shitty city today. The fact of the matter is doctors don't value themselves.
It's been ingrained in us to denigrate ourselves. I call it the battered spouse syndrome. And you know exactly what I mean. It's just you automatically approach every conversation like you're the battered spouse. I'm like, you have to change your mindset about this.
But how long does that take? That takes a few minutes. Like you figured it out.
It does.
But it takes
time. A cultural shift. Yeah, it's a cultural shift. And I think that's going to have to start very early. Now, what you don't want to have is a prima donna complex, which my impression is our millennial colleagues and our Gen Z colleagues, they have a combination of this entitlement mentality. They're the greatest thing since sliced bread, but also they're incredibly downtrodden and they don't have any opportunities. I think mindset's very important. Very hard to change culture, very hard to change mindset. Some of this is self-inflicted. How do you change it? Like you said, you have to start building ecosystems and show people how to do it. Dutch people are taking advantage, are doing what you're saying. Cardiothoracic surgeons and vascular surgeons 10, 15 years ago were saying, I'm going to run a vein clinic. You see all these PRP centers, stem cell centers, pain clinics, low T centers. And I'm like, I didn't get into medicine to do that. I understand why people are doing things like that they feel that's the way they can monetize or get some value out of the system. But was that really the mission? At some point you say, I've done enough mission. I've got to make some money. It's really sad because you've got a lot of good physicians in this country who want to be engaged and we're being throttled.
Yeah, you want to do good work. Yeah. Like I tell this to all these people, when I had to go on this darn missions trip when I was in undergrad, that's what I saw. That's what inspired me. I saw hundreds of physicians doing exactly what they were born to do, which was help a ton of people. I heard weeping. And when you hear that, you get real emotional real fast. These guys were working around the clock. And by the way, then I probably should say doctors, because there was a ton of dentists there too, right? They were doing what they could because they figured out long ago that if you don't have good teeth, you might have a bad heart. And so it was like, oh, let's fix these people. And these people were walking out of the jungle. And I'm not being dramatic. There's plenty of people that listen to our podcast that have done those trips. And then it's amazing because you go, okay, this is what doctors were designed to do. How come we don't let them do that now? What's the problem?
Yeah, so one of my associates here in Vanderbilt runs the healthcare program at the Owen Graduate School of Management. Ranga Ramanujam, I'm going to give him a plug. Ranga's great. Ranga basically is an organizational behavior professor. One of the books that he used to teach for behavior is about one of my favorite healthcare cases, and that's Arvind Eye Care. And the book is called Infinite Vision. And if you guys have some time, read that book. They use that in the healthcare certification class. They have a bunch of doctors in there. Ranga tells me there's always one physician in that class who, after having read that book, says, I was so grizzled and jaded by the profession, and reading this book reconnected me with why I wanted to do this job. The founder of that facility, one of my spiritual heroes, Dr. V, I'm not going to try to say his last name, even though I'm Indian. He said, I'm going to solve a very simple problem of white cataracts that are making people go blind. I'm going to cure preventable blindness. And we're going to have two principal tenets at the facility that I set up. Nobody refuses care, and payment is voluntary. And I'm like, that's insane. Only a doctor would be insane enough to say something like that. And the guy also said, 0 is a price point for us. I'm like, only a doctor would say something like that. But if you, and I use this part of a grand rounds I give about defining value in healthcare. It's really amazing what happens when physicians get to set the tempo, define the mission, what they can do. You should see their business.
Magic.
I mean, and they're profitable.
Magic.
They're just to make money, but they are profitable. And I remember talking to the founder's nephew, who's an ophthalmic surgeon. He's chief medical officer over there. He might be even higher up in the ranks of the organization. They built their own lens manufacturing company to do intraocular implants. They brought the prices of the IOLs down to under $5. And 10 years ago, I said, we were approached to sell this for a high 8-figure sum by a medical device company, and we said no. And the reason why they said no, it would compromise our mission. And I'm like, only a doctor would say that. That's inspiring.
I hear these stories all the time, and I love them because it's true. What caused all of the physicians, like all the guys that built ASCs in the late 90s and all of the docs that built hospitals in the early 90s and late 80s, they had similar stories, right? They're like, oh, I took a year off clinical practice and I didn't ask anybody for help. Like I figured out how to hire a GC, how to read blueprints, and how to do it all. Who does that? By the way, I did it. But the point being but it's intellectual curiosity that's mission and purpose driven. I'm on a mission to do this. My purpose in life is this. And now I'm going to go execute. And when you feel that in your heart, nothing can stop you. I got to be careful when I move my arm like that. I don't want to get in trouble. I moved it sideways, not up. Anyways, I'm making a joke. But the point is, these kind of stories, I love them. Dr. Dix, I love them because that's the heart of all of it. Now, I don't know how to convince any of these lawmaker dingbats that are up here to do it because it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible. And moving these...
Get out of our way.
I teeter, and Dr. Giorgio does a really good job of this. I want to be here to advocate, and I want to work with the lobbyists that we've hired. But at the same time, I want to get rid of the whole city and just say, what's the private practice alternative? And I spend 80% of my time building businesses, and I spend 20% of my time advocating. So maybe that's part of it. And maybe that's what physicians have to do. They have to take 80% of their time and say, okay, I'm going to take care of patients. And I'm going to do it my way. I don't care about the administrators. And then
culture's got to change.
Anthony's done a great job with that. And then 20% advocacy.
The culture has to change. That's a very hard lift. The culture is very different from what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing about the people going to medical school. It's not a can-do attitude. It's like, when's my shift up?
Yeah.
Hard to do that.
Well, we've talked about that. We've talked about the job versus a profession, right?
They want it to be a job. That's fine.
But it's never been a job. And it's not going to be one.
No. No, not when your post-op comes back to the ER at 2 a.m. It's not a job then.